Everyone says buying a home is the ultimate financial milestone. But is it really wealth building or just an illusion of ownership? Hello, and welcome to Before the Returns, the podcast where we discuss how money is not the goal, but purpose is the goal. I'm your host, Jaden Zubal. Like we've talked about in the past two episodes, what matters most isn't the return you hope for, it's the structure you put around your money. Today, we're going to spend some time and talk about the idea of renting versus buying. This is a conversation I hear frequently from clients, friends, just everywhere. I hear it multiple times a week. I've personally spent quite a bit of time considering this idea, listened to dozens of different proponents on both sides of the fence here. So let's start with a little bit of cultural background. Here in the United States of America, it is pretty consistent that the American dream is to own a home and have that home be the place for your family, your friends, everybody to gather, right? Whenever you think about the American dream and what that really is, it typically involves some form of home ownership. And I certainly understand that. I agree with it. I've spent my entire life with that same concept and that same idea in my head. And in all fairness to all of you out there, when I think about strategy financially, there's really two aspects to it that I think are really important. You have the mathematical side of financial strategy, and then you have the emotional side of financial strategy. So today, I'm going to try to touch on both of those things and come to some sort of general consensus of when renting is better and when buying is better. Okay, because I think there is an argument to be made for both sides here. And again, I say that with the perspective of somebody who has invested in real estate now for a decade. I've owned homes that I've lived in. I've also rented in homes while I own homes that other people live in. So there is certainly an argument to be made for both sides. Now, where does this idea, though, of the American dream come from? Why is it so important that we all own the homes that we live in? Well, after World War II, the GI Bill made home loans more accessible for returning soldiers. Combine that with suburban development and government incentives, and homeownership quickly became the centerpiece of the American dream. Owning a home wasn't just about shelter anymore. It became a symbol of stability, success, and adulthood. So the idea was, and we've probably all heard this, but renting equals throwing your money away, right? Now, that belief that buying a home is the ultimate mark of success still shapes how we think about money today. But when we actually run the numbers, the story looks a little bit different. Okay, and especially given the times that we're in today. So economically, the let's just say the overall economy that we live in today is a little bit different than it was 4 or 5 years ago, right? Buying a home 4 or 5 years ago looked significantly different than it does today. Okay, so is buying a home really the ultimate mark of success? Or is that fulfilling more of the emotional side of the strategy and not always fulfilling the mathematical side? Now, for this comparison, we're really going to just look at today and the environment that we're in today, right? If I were to do this 5 years ago, it would be a little bit of a different answer. And probably 5 years from now, it's going to be a little bit different as well. So it's really important to look at your numbers and where you're at in the current environment before you make these kinds of decisions. I'm going to try and keep this as straightforward and simple as possible while also being accurate with the details. And I'll make sure to link all of this either in the show notes, provide some sort of PDF download, something that can give you the details of this example. All right, let's take a look at this here. So if we had, using Utah where I'm at, a typical 5-bedroom, 3-bathroom house, and you were to rent that, let's say that rent in year one started at $2,800 a month. And I'll assume that the rent goes up every year just to be fair. So you're getting an increased rent expense each year, and we'll look at a 10-year comparison. So by the time you get to the end of that 10 years, you would be paying a little under $3,700 a month. Now, if we did that, we'd pay around $385,000 in rent over a 10-year period. So that's a big expense, right? $385,000 out the door in 10 years. Now let's compare that though to buying the same home. So that 5-bedroom, 3-bathroom house here in Utah, it's probably valued around $750,000. Okay, there's going to be a lot of fluctuation in that depending on the area that you buy in, depending on how new the home is, the upgrades, all that kind of stuff. But for the sake of this comparison, it's probably around 750,000. Let's assume you put in a 10% down payment. So $75,000 goes in right out of the gate. We won't even include closing costs, all of the extras in this comparison here. Now, your mortgage payment, if you had a $675,000 mortgage, so after your down payment at 6.5%, which is pretty close to today's rates, before principal and interest would be around $42.66 a month. If you take into account your taxes, your interest, your maintenance, all of the things that we should be paying attention to, probably budgeting more for around $5,300 a month. Okay. Good majority of that is the actual principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. But then I budgeted a few $100s a month in there for maintenance to take care of the property. Since you own it, on average, people are spending at least a couple $100s a month between things they want to do to their home just for upgrades and changes and little things here and there, or actual maintenance expenses that do come up over time. So over 10 years, you'd have roughly $639,000 in expenses for that home. Plus, you put $75,000 in up front, so you will have spent around $714,000. Now that covers everything, right? That's your down payment. That's your actual mortgage expense. That's maintenance, budgeting. Hopefully that's enough for all your maintenance. Again, I tried to be really conservative with these numbers here. And then it also includes your property taxes and your insurance. Okay, so on the surface, buying costs almost twice as much as renting in that first decade. And towards the end of the episode, I'm going to recap a few things here. And it's really important to remember this is a 10-year window that we're looking at. Okay, so next we need to look at that. That was oversimplified, right? So now we need to remember when you buy a home, you also have equity growth, meaning your home goes up in value over time and you're also paying the mortgage down. Okay, so you're kind of getting equity in two different ways. Now, I made, again, some big assumptions here. So if we assume that homes in Utah have appreciated around 5% per year, and they continue to do that over the next 10 years, that $750,000 house that you bought will be worth around $1.2 million in 10 years. Mortgage balance after 10 years, maybe right around $575,000. So you've paid a good chunk of that down, which means you have now $647,000 in equity. So your net cost would be the $714,000 that you spent minus the $647,000 in equity. So you have a cost over that 10-year period of $69,000. So direct comparison to buying versus renting. In that example, if you did it for 10 years, you will spend on the rental $385,000, give or take. On the purchase, $69,000. Okay, so that looks pretty good for buying a home. But again, we are still leaving part of the picture out here. This is where we start to look at, okay, as a business owner, as an investor, as somebody who wants to invest and wants to grow their wealth, now we're going to look outside of the emotional aspect of owning a home. And we're going to look at, well, what if we were to take the $75,000 that we put down on our home and take the difference between the $2,800 we were paying in rent and the $5,300, give or take a few dollars there on your home expenses? What if we were to take that difference and invest it. So if we do that, now we have, again, 75,000 initially invested. And I said that we would invest this and get an 8% return. So pretty conservative, actually, when you look at almost anywhere that you could invest your money. That grows to $162,000 over the same 10-year period. Now we also have what we are saving between our home expenses and our rent expenses. Okay, so the difference is $2,530 in year one, meaning $2,500 per month for that first year. And then that difference starts to shrink a little bit because I assumed our rent is increasing, right? And your mortgage payment shouldn't really increase much other than changes in taxes and things like that. So investing that monthly savings at 8% grows to 402,000 over the same 10 years. So your total and investment return there is $564,000. And again, this is assuming an 8% return. Subtract the rent that we paid, and the renter now ends up with a net positive of $179,000. So, what's our takeaway from this? And again, I hope this wasn't overcomplicated. It's really intended to just show we hear people all the time talk about how renting is better or buying is better, but there's never any real detail behind it, right? I'm trying to give just enough detail here that we can see it really does depend on the scenario. Because on that high level surface picture, it looked like buying was a lot better. But then when we dive into this a little bit, essentially what it comes down to is if the renter is disciplined and invests the difference, they actually can come out more than $240,000 ahead of the homeowner after 10 years, right? Because the homeowner was negative $69,000 still. The renter was positive $179,000 over that 10-year period. And again, let's tie back into the 10 years now. So if you plan to live in that home for more like 20 or 30 years, you might start to see some bigger advantages with the home ownership. But even at that, if you're a disciplined renter, you may actually do better across the board as a renter. So let me give some additional story and context to this. I personally rent the home that I live in currently because this example that I just shared is very, very close to the example of what put me as a renter today. 2 years ago, I was living in a home that I owned. I chose to sell that, and I have since acquired 4 other rental properties that we have rented out. So I'm still getting the benefits of home ownership from the aspect of those properties do appreciate. But I also take in rent. And so there's a little bit of income from that as well, right? Now, the rent that I pay allows me to live in a home that fits my lifestyle, accommodates my family well. I'm paying close to half for my rent as I would be for the mortgage payment because of the environment that we're in, right? So, broader lesson here is that renting isn't failure. Buying is also not guaranteed success. It's not really about where your money goes, but it's more about the structure behind it and what you're going to do, right? It's the same idea as how, if any of you have ever listened to like Dave Ramsey, for example, there's a lot of things that I don't agree with about what Dave Ramsey says, but there are some things that do make sense and that can even be applied to some of what we'll talk about here. One of the things that I don't necessarily agree with is when he says buy term and invest the difference. However, if we take that idea and that concept and we turn it into what we're talking about here, we could say rent and invest the difference, right? Because I'll get into this in a future episode, but I think of term insurance as renting your insurance. That's what you're doing there. And there's a time and a place for that. There's a time to rent your insurance. There's a time to spend money on that because it fulfills the emotional need, even though there's something you're missing out on there from a mathematical standpoint. So now in this broader concept of real estate, really what we're looking at is when you rent, you can now invest the difference between what you would have been paying for a mortgage and what you're paying for rent, right? Just as we saw in this example. And you can typically get a little bit better return. and a little bit better outcome. But it does require some strategy and some discipline, right? It's not just going to happen all by itself. So, to kind of wrap up this episode and this conversation, in the coming weeks and the coming episodes, I'll get into some of that back end structure, some of what I call family banking, which is really one of the clearest ways I've found to create control, purpose, and structure with money. Just like we saw in the episode today, the house itself won't make you wealthy. It's the structure you build around your money that will. Okay. So money is not the goal, purpose is the goal. If this helped you think differently about renting versus buying, share it with a friend or leave a quick review. It means a lot to us. It helps grow this channel, grow and expand what we're trying to do here and the message that I'm hoping to give to our listeners. So, with that, thank you so much for joining, and we'll see you on next week's episode.